Developing right now on Morning News Now, triple-digit danger. Millions of people bracing for another scorcher. On the West Coast, record-breaking heat fueling more than 20 wildfires. And across the U.S., heat alerts are in effect with temps soaring up to 25 degrees above average. We have team coverage on the conditions, the warnings, what to expect where you live. Also this morning, action at the border. Today, President Biden set to make an executive order to protect undocumented immigrants who are married to American citizens. Plus, taxing the rich. The IRS closing a big loophole that has cost the country billions of dollars. We're going to break down the plan that's taking aim at some of the wealthiest earners. And it's a new take on an old tradition. We're going to introduce you to an Irish dancer who's won over millions of online followers with her modern spin on the classic style. Good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. We begin this morning with the life-threatening heat wave that is building in parts of the Midwest and the East Coast. Now, summer officially starts Friday, but these dangerously high temps are forcing major cities to take action now. In New York and Vermont, cooling centers are set to open today, complete with cooling kits for those who work outdoors. The National Weather Service says a huge swath of the country, from the Great Lakes all the way to Maine, is facing an extreme heat risk. Let's break it down. More than 150 million people are dealing with temps in the 90s today, 9 million of them clocking numbers into the triple digits. Officials are urging people to practice heat safety over the next week. That means limiting time outdoors and staying hydrated. We have meteorologist Michelle Grossman standing by with what to expect from this heat wave. Spoiler alert, it's going to be a while. But first, NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa is in Pittsburgh, where it's been decades since the city has seen temps like this so early in the season. Maggie, good morning.
Hey, Joe. Good morning from Pittsburgh, where things are heating up rapidly once again this morning, with temperatures set to hover at or near the triple digits here later on this week, something that is incredibly rare for this part of the country, for Pittsburgh specifically, this time of year, just basically in June at all. Overall, this morning, more than 70 million Americans are waking up under heat alerts from like Iowa up through Maine. And what that means is, our team tells us, this thing is really barreling east. This heat dome is basically expanding up along the East Coast. Out west, the emergency remains wildfires. We are counting this morning more than 20 burning across multiple states, the vast majority of them 15 in California. That being said, 2 are growing near a village in New Mexico. Officials in Ruidoso telling people, the entire village effectively, to evacuate yesterday as those fires continue to move, driven by the heat and driven also by the winds. Again, similar stories like what we were watching yesterday in California. Returning to the heat here out on the East Coast, kind of adding to all of this chaos. We had severe storms moving through here yesterday, and that knocked out power in Pittsburgh for tens of thousands of people. Crews this morning are racing to restore it, knowing how desperate everyone is for air conditioning. Joe, I'll send it back to you.
All right, Maggie Vespa, thank you. Let's get to NBC meteorologist Michelle Grossman, who has the hot forecast for today and beyond. Michelle, good morning.
Hi there, Joe. And you're right. We're going to see this for days to come, even into early next week. So right now, we're looking at 73 million impacted by heat alerts. A heat alert is really just a heads up from the National Weather Service saying, let's prepare for this dangerous heat over the next several days. We're going to have the hot days, hot nights, or warmer nights, and then extended periods of those hot days. So we have heat advisories. That's in the orange. Heat watches in that darker red, pink color, and the heat warnings are in the pink. So major cities like Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Boston, seeing these really high temperatures, even into northern New England. We're going to be into the 90s in some spots. Take a look at all these little dots. These are potential record highs through Friday. So this is a widespread area from the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, the Northeast, into New England, where we could see record temperatures into the upper 90s. You factor in the humidity. Now, luckily, it's not going to be skyrocketing humidity, but still enough to make us feel like over 100 degrees in some spots. So for today, those record-breaking temperatures could be in Detroit, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, D.C. D.C. are going to be 7 degrees above normal at 92. Burlington, Vermont, 95. We're looking at 90 in Boston, 91 in Bangor, Maine. That's 16 degrees above what is expected for this time of year. Keep in mind, summer does not come until Thursday. And then by tomorrow, that heat stays in place. We're looking at temperatures once again into the 90s, even near 100 degrees in Syracuse. That's 19 degrees above normal. 96 in Concord, Hartford, looking at 94, 88 degrees in Baltimore. And unfortunately, it stays in place. This is Thursday's 80s, 90s, near 100 degrees in Manchester. We're looking at 91 in Plattsburgh. A lot of spots in northern New England not used to this heat. A lot don't have air conditioning, so you want to get the fans and stay really hydrated over the next several days. The heat will contribute to more dry conditions and more red flag warnings of fire risks throughout the Southwest and parts of the West. We're looking at 7 million people impacted by red flag warnings, so be careful there with that elevated risk in parts of New Mexico. And then we're heating up in the tropics as well. We're watching an area of low pressure, not quite tight in terms of circulation, but still looking at tropical storm force winds at 40 miles per hour. Right now, it's called the potential tropical cyclone 1. Could become a tropical storm before it makes landfall in Mexico. But the bigger story here, Joe, is that we're going to see widespread rain in Texas. Could see up to 15 inches in some spots.
Stuff going on everywhere. What's crazy about New England is the farther north you go, the hotter it seems to get.
And so not used to that.
Exactly.
Right. And so early on.
Exactly. All right, Michelle, thank you so much. Now to a hot topic in Washington, immigration. The Biden administration is announcing new executive action today to shield undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens from deportation. Now, this comes days after the 12th anniversary of the Obama administration's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, better known as DACA. That's the program that protects young adults who are brought to the U.S. as children from deportation. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us with the latest details. Monica, good morning. So what can you tell us about this new executive action and how it all came together?
Well, Joe, remember a couple weeks back when President Biden made that announcement about trying to enact his authority to temporarily shut down the border and restrict asylum to those who are trying to seek it. He said at the end of that speech that he would have more steps to lay out about how to make the immigration system fair overall. And that is what we are expected to see today, at least one part of that. This will apply to undocumented immigrants who came to the U.S. more than 10 years ago and then married U.S. citizens. So we expect, according to the Biden administration, this would apply to roughly 500,000 people who are living in the United States. And effectively, it would shield them from deportation. So they could, in some instances, after their cases are reviewed, apply for a green card and ultimately have a path to citizenship. So this is significant, Joe, because after the president had done some steps that were considered to be a little bit more right-leaning, this is what some Democrats and allies of the president and lawmakers had called for in terms of trying to do something they believe is a little bit more humanitarian in contrast to what we saw some time ago.
Still, we can assume this is going to face some opposition. Anyone already speaking out against this executive action? Any legal challenges we could expect?
Yes, and the Biden administration was fully bracing for legal challenges. They expect that, and they are trying to say that with this executive action, they have tried to put it in a place that it's muscular enough that it could stand up to some of those court challenges, but they do expect that that will be likely, and some Republicans and others have already spoken out about this. This is effectively called parole in place, and it is significant because there are these larger questions about how some of the mechanisms could work. And again, anything that President Biden is trying to do right now using his unilateral action could be undone or reversed if he loses re-election and there's another administration that comes in next year. Joe.
Monica, a moment ago I mentioned DACA. The White House is set to host an event this afternoon to mark the 12th anniversary of DACA. What can we expect at the event?
Yeah, and it's significant. And we knew that over the weekend during the anniversary of that really important step from former President Obama, who announced that in his own re-election year back in 2012, that President Biden said he was going to continue to seek protections for so-called dreamers, for people who are applicable under this program. And now we know today he is going to be rolling out some new steps that would allow dreamers to apply for work visas. So that is a step up from some of the other work entry and work requirement type programs that they could apply to. So he's going to be announcing that as well when he speaks on this larger issue and the topic of immigration overall, which we know is a political vulnerability for him. Joe.
Right. Monica Alba, thank you so much. With the election less than 5 months away, some Republicans are already pushing a plan dubbed Project 2025 if former President Trump retakes the White House. The plan would reimagine the checks and balances that have defined the country since its founding. Project 2025 would put virtually every part of the federal government solely in Mr. Trump's control. As NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson reports, it's a plan that has conservatives cheering and critics sounding the alarm.
The blueprint for a second Trump term? It may be this document, more than 900 pages long, outlining big changes to government as we know it.
If we don't win, this country is finished.
Making a splash everywhere from Congress.
Project 2025 is a far-right manifesto.
To TikTok.
Project 2025 likely isn't going to happen.
Making a stir among progressives.
It is a 900-page blueprint for an authoritarian takeover.
Oh, just the right's blueprint for reshaping America.
Project 2025, the brainchild of former Trump officials and conservative think tank The Heritage Foundation.
Weaponized conservatives ready to do battle against the deep state.
That battle plan outlining several key proposals, including a federal government under much tighter presidential control. Even now, independent agencies like the Department of Justice would answer almost entirely to the president. It's a controversial idea known as unitary executive theory that would streamline decision-making and potentially replace many career civil servants with political appointees presumably loyal to Mr. Trump. The plan calls for more spending for a U.S.-Mexico border wall, a signature Trump proposal back in 2016.
Build that wall.
More federal power to control immigration and increased fees for the immigrants allowed to stay. On this side of the border, big cuts to corporate taxes and income tax for America's highest earners, cuts to federal investments in renewable energy and carbon reduction goals, and more fossil fuel and energy production. Project 2025 also taking aim at what it calls woke culture warriors, calling for deleting a long list of terms from all federal rules, including sexual orientation and gender identity. It also would eliminate the education department. It's not uncommon for think tanks to create wish lists for governments in waiting. But with the race for the White House basically deadlocked, Democratic opposition to the plan is ramping up against what Congressman Jared Huffman, behind the Stop Project 2025 task force, calls a dystopian plot.
I think what troubles me the most is just the explicitness of the extremism. We've never seen them talk in this kind of a swaggering, explicit way about basically gutting our democracy. They're doing it now, and the people who are saying these things are the most inner circle leaders of Donald Trump's political world.
Those behind Project 2025 accuse Democrats of fear-mongering.
This really would tee up an incoming administration to achieve more than we've ever seen under a conservative president before.
Our thanks to Hallie Jackson for that report. We reached out to the Trump campaign for reaction to Project 2025's proposals. The campaign says, quote, no aspect of future presidential staffing or policy announcements should be deemed official unless coming from Mr. Trump himself. For more, we're now joined by NBC News senior national politics reporter John Allen. John, good morning. So we've heard from the Trump campaign on Project 2025, but the team has also been pointing to their so-called Agenda 47 as the official playbook for the next Trump presidency. So what is that, and what kind of overlap is there between the two?
Good morning, Joe. You make the proper distinction there. Agenda 47 is Donald Trump's platform for the 2024 election. And so the policies that are envisioned in Agenda 47 are ones that he has specifically endorsed, whereas Project 2025 is a broader set of policies, in some cases much more specific about what and how a new administration, a Trump administration, might try to enact various policies. And I think probably most important about Project 2025 is it basically creates a reservoir of ideas and of policies that aren't really necessarily campaign fodder. That is to say, it's not the stuff Donald Trump's going to talk about for the most part of the campaign trail, but it is the stuff that is going to affect the way that government interacts with Americans in their daily lives, and the power of the executive branch versus the legislative branch, which has been growing for many years. And perhaps not surprisingly, the more powerful the executive branch becomes, the less Americans have faith in government.
John Allen, thank you so much for your reporting. Turning now to the war in Gaza, NBC News is learning more about the Palestinian children killed by Israeli forces during that deadly hostage rescue more than a week ago. NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez joins us now with more on their devastating stories. Raf.
Joe, good morning. We have spent a lot of time talking about those 4 hostages rescued from central Gaza, the conditions of their captivity, the emotional reunions with their families after 8 months held inside of central Gaza, but we wanted to tell you the other side of the story, which is about the human cost of that hostage rescue mission. Take a look.
These images of Israeli commandos rescuing terrified hostages and reuniting them with their families after 8 months of Hamas captivity were celebrated around the world. But inside Gaza, our NBC News crew documenting the painful other side of the story. The Hamas-run health ministry says at least 64 children were killed by Israeli fire during the raid. These are the stories of 3 of them, Tawfiq, Karam, and Ahmed. Sahar Esleh was already a mother in mourning long before the raid. Her eldest son died of cancer in 2022. And in March, she says her 2 daughters were killed by an Israeli strike. Sahar says 4-year-old Tawfiq, her only surviving child, would ask, "Why am I living? Why didn't I go with my sisters?" On June 8th, as Israeli troops moved in, Sahar says she crouched in this corner, cradling Tawfiq in her arms before the room went black, and she saw blood on his face. Doctors at first thought Tawfiq was dead.
He's 4 years old child.
But just as he was being placed among the bodies, his hand twitched. A desperate rush to the emergency room, but the hope short-lived. He died 5 days later, his mother says. He lived through 3 wars, his brother's death, his sister's deaths. Tawfiq never saw anything but war. The IDF says it has acted since the beginning of the war on its duty to return the hostages brutally kidnapped on October 7th, adding, "This operation is solid proof Hamas is hiding behind civilians and is holding hostages in the midst of densely populated civilian areas." You can see the house where Tawfiq was killed was just 200 yards from the civilian homes where the hostages were held. But over a mile away near the coast, Noura Abu Hamis says she was getting lunch ready when Israeli helicopters opened fire on their camp. Her 8-year-old son Karam was killed instantly, she says, while his older brother Ahmed later died of his injuries. He would tell me, "I want to go abroad and study and come back to Gaza. I'd like to be a doctor, Mommy." The IDF says every loss of civilian life is a tragedy that Hamas brought upon us all. The IDF will continue to take all feasible measures in order to minimize civilian casualties. Little comfort for Noura, who's left with only pictures and memories of her 2 young boys who made each other smile even in a war they couldn't understand.
You have to keep me.
Okay, all right, here we go. And Joe, we spoke to an American doctor who was working at the Al-Aqsa hospital where both of those families brought their wounded children. He told us that it was just an unrelenting wave of patients coming in, that it started off being what medics call a red zone, lots of very badly wounded people. But by the end of the day, it was half red zone, half morgue. Joe.
All right, Raf, thank you so much. Now to another major conflict. Ukrainian commanders are hoping that newly arrived American weapons will help to push back Russian forces as the war in Ukraine rages on. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is in Kyiv, and a warning: some images in this report are disturbing.
Abrams tanks defend Ukraine's eastern front line near the Russian border. Resupplies of American weapons are flowing again, and Ukrainian troops tell us they're arriving just in the nick of time.
Resupplies of American weapons, including these tanks, are now finally, after long delays, making their way to the front lines. And it's making a difference. Ukrainian troops have already been able to slow down a major Russian offensive.
Ukraine is flush at the moment. $60 billion in aid from Congress, $50 billion more from interest on frozen Russian funds.
We're here.
And at a conference on peace in Switzerland over the weekend, the United States was among 80 nations pledging support for Ukraine's territorial integrity. But a tank commander here tells us he's worried about pressure on Ukraine to make a deal with Russia.
Everyone in the West should understand that once we cede more territories to Russia, it will not stop.
And Ukrainians have a more immediate problem, a Russian technological innovation, so-called glide bombs.
This shopping center was hit by just 2 glide bombs, and the impact was devastating. Russia has vast quantities of old-fashioned style bombs, and by attaching wings and a basic guidance system to them, Russia has not only managed to extend their range, but turn them into precision weapons that Ukraine has been struggling to deal with.
Surveillance video captured the moment of the attack. Officials say 19 Ukrainians were killed, including 2 children. President Zelensky says Russia is now firing 3,000 glide bombs a month. Commanders tell us they don't have an effective way to stop them.
Our thanks to Richard Engel for that report. Russian President Putin is traveling to North Korea today to meet with leader Kim Jong-un. North Korea has huge stockpiles of artillery shells, some of which U.S. officials say have been provided to Russia. Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, taxing the rich. We're going to break down a new plan to close an old tax loophole and how it could cost some of the wealthiest Americans billions of dollars. Up first after the break, Olympic preps. Paris taking precautions to keep athletes and fans safe from the heat during the summer games. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're back with drama inside a dorm. An NYU freshman who just happens to be the daughter of a Russian mining magnate is suing her roommate. She claims the roommate stole jewelry, designer clothes, and bags totaling more than $50,000 and then allegedly tried to sell some of it. NBC News law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter has that story.
Away from home, at a big school in a big city, being a freshman is hard enough until you realize your roommate might be stealing your stuff for profit. We're not talking about college hoodies or Insta coffee machines. Instead, Aurora Agapov, whose father Andre is a Russian-American mining magnate and CEO of a gold mining company, says her NYU roommate swiped tens of thousands of dollars of luxury handbags and jewelry, then turned around and sold it on the RealReal. The NYPD got involved. A lawsuit filed, the tabloids splashing the case and the merch across the internet. According to the NYPD, Agapov made a complaint saying she started noticing some of her stuff missing in February of this year. According to the lawsuit, Agapov did her 18-year-old roommate, Caitlin Fung. Fung signed into her The RealReal account from her phone and showed Agapov the items ready for sale or already sold. Some of the items, according to the suit: an 18-carat ruby ring worth more than $23,000, a purse and a tote together worth more than $7 grand, a Chanel bracelet, a Bulgari necklace. All told, approximately $51,000 in items stolen, the suit says. A spokesperson for the RealReal says, "We're working with local authorities on this matter and have released all requested information." Despite some on social media making light of the story or even validating Fung's alleged theft, the police aren't messing around, ultimately taking Fung into custody and charging her with third-degree grand larceny last month, according to a spokesperson. The police report alleges Fung told the NYPD she took the items. For her side of the story, an email and a message to Fung on her LinkedIn, where she says she is studying politics and criminology, were not returned. An NYU spokesperson declined to comment on the specific incident, but said stealing from a roommate there is rare, typically would lead to serious consequences such as a suspension, and is a, quote, lousy thing to do. Fung's mother has also been named in this suit. Agapov claims that Fung's mother called the RealReal's brick-and-mortar store for the unsold items that were allegedly taken, and that they were returned to Fung's family home, and that those items have not yet found their way back into Agapov's hands. There's no attorney that's been listed for the family to respond to the lawsuit, and will continue to seek comment.
All right, Tom Winter, thank you. Overseas, officials in Paris are taking extra steps to make sure athletes and attendees stay safe and stay cool during the summer's Olympic Games. Comes on the heels of a new report from Climate Central, which shows Paris has actually gotten 6 degrees hotter than the last time it hosted the Games a century ago in 1924. And in the past, heat waves this time of year have killed thousands of people in France. National climate reporter Chase Kane spoke to some Olympians who are now pushing to change when and where the Summer Games are held.
During the Tokyo Olympics, the dangerous combination of heat and humidity made it feel at times like 116 degrees, the hottest Olympics on record. I struggled to stay cool while just sitting in the skateboarding arena. So maybe no surprise that according to a report from Japanese doctors, at least 131 athletes needed medical treatment during the Tokyo Games because of heat.
It's in an athlete's DNA to push themselves to the absolute limits. You know, when we're talking about Olympic Games, the reason you're there is because you push your body to those limits. Within safe conditions, that's one thing, but when things get unsafe, yeah, it becomes pretty dangerous.
This Scottish rugby player is one of a dozen Olympians sounding the alarm in advance of the Games. And just last summer, heat waves across France killed 5,000 people. Another in 2003 killed at least 14,000. And that's the main concern highlighted in this report.
I guess I still am just surprised of the timing of these Olympics. I mean, we have seen such deadly heat waves in this exact location at this exact time. Athletes are by far the most at risk here, but also people who are attending, people who are working, people who are outside.
I think in a lot of places in the U.S. and around the world, just summertime competitions, unless they're held in the middle of the night, are going to become essentially impossible.
The International Olympic Committee says the health of athletes is a top concern, and Paris 2024 says they will have free water stations across every venue, and they'll also consider shifting the time of outdoor competition if temperatures top 90 degrees.
To the specific context of climate change.
Something Paris's deputy mayor says they've been working for years to limit as climate change makes Paris increasingly hot.
7 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 Celsius is a big deal if you're in the middle of a heat wave. That's a big difference in temperature.
Yes, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous for the daily life, and so we need to transform the city as fast as possible to protect people and to make the city more sustainable for the future generations.
And that's why they've invested billions in planting trees to cool the city, adding bike lanes to cut emissions, and working to clean up the polluted Seine River. Positive steps to host the Olympics and permanent benefits for 2 million Parisians. But one sustainability decision has gotten a lukewarm reception. The Athletes' Village will rely on carbon-free geothermal district cooling instead of traditional air conditioning, similar to what's used in parts of downtown Chicago and New York.
Just to put a button on this, there's not a limit in terms of outside heat or humidity where this stops working.
Well,
or is there?
Like all of us, equipment prefers not so hot and not so humid. I mean, we never know what Mother Nature's going to throw at us, right? I mean, it could be a heat dome that could be, very challenging.
Paris 2024 officials say it will keep indoor temperatures at least 11 degrees cooler, but they'll still make individual AC available on request.
Which in one way reduces the emission for the games, but on the other side, for an athlete, that is, they cannot stay cool and cannot recover fast. So I think from an athlete's perspective, that is a negative.
And that tension underscores the urgency of addressing climate change, along with Paris 2024's efforts to cut their carbon footprint. In Paris, I'm National Climate Reporter Chase Kane.
And Olympic officials say they do plan to have meteorologists working in their operations center 24/7 before and during the Olympics. More international headlines now. The U.S. is condemning China over a collision with a Philippine supply ship in the disputed South China Sea. NBC International correspondent Claudio Lavanga has that and other world headlines. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Well, that's right. The U.S. condemned China over Monday's collision between a Chinese vessel and a supply ship from the Philippines in the South China Sea. Well, now the collision was only the latest in a series of confrontations between the two countries in the disputed sea. In a post on X, Washington's ambassador to Manila, Mary Kay Carlson, accused China of aggressive and dangerous maneuvers which caused bodily injury and damaged Philippine vessels. China claims sovereignty over almost all of the South China Sea, while other countries, including the Philippines, hold competing claims. Let's go to Germany now, where authorities seized 39 tons of cocaine worth some $2.78 billion in what they say, and not surprisingly so, is the biggest ever cocaine find in the country. The drug was found hidden among vegetables and fruit in several container ships in the ports of Hamburg and Rotterdam, following a tip from Colombian authorities. 7 people of different nationalities from Germany, Azerbaijan, Bulgaria, Morocco, Turkey, and Ukraine were arrested. And let's end this tour of the world in London, where legendary actor Sir Ian McKellen fell off stage during a performance of Player Kings at the theatre there. After the fall, the 85-year-old actor who played Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings cried out in pain and called for help before a staff member rushed on stage. McKellen was taken to a hospital, but a theater spokesperson said he's in good spirit. He will make a speedy and full recovery and is expected to return to the stage on Wednesday. Back to you, Joe.
Glad to hear he's doing well. Claudio, thank you so much. Coming up, a battle at bedtime. More kids struggling to sleep say they're worried or anxious. So we're going to take a closer look at the problem and what parents can do to help. Also, hoops history. The Boston Celtics now NBA champs again. More on their record-breaking win next on Morning News Now. We're back with our weekly mental health check-in. This morning, we're looking at the reaction to that big announcement from the Surgeon General about warning labels on social media platforms. Plus, Inside Out 2 has us all talking about our emotions again. Here to talk about these stories and more is Dr. Erica Richards. She is the chair and medical director of the Department of Psychiatry at Sibley Memorial Hospital. Dr. Richards, always good to have you with us. So let's start with Surgeon General Vivek Murthy's call for a warning label to be included on social media platforms. He says social media is associated with significant mental health harms for adolescents. He wrote that in the New York Times, also speaking yesterday with NBC News. He's calling on parents and communities also to set up phone-free zones in homes and classrooms. What do you think? Is all this going to be effective?
Good morning, Joe. This is a start. Will it be effective? I think that's the theme of the day in relation to social media, which is that the jury is still out. We need more information. But what mental health experts agree is that there is a mental health crisis among young people. And more importantly, we know that social media is an important contributor. So what the Surgeon General has done in this op-ed is essentially called for a warning that applies to all social media platforms. The reason that this is important is because this is very similar to 1965, when in 1964, the Surgeon General at the time published a study that linked cigarette smoking to lung cancer and heart disease. And the year following, there was a warning that was posted on all cigarette packs. So this is similar to that in saying, listen, this may be harmful to your health. Now, what we need to determine and what we need to understand is that there's additional research that's needed for really the cause and effect. We know that, in the 5 years where there's been a surge in social media use for young people, they spend about, I think, 5 hours a day on social media. That has increased significantly. Unfortunately, so have suicidal thoughts. And we're trying to figure out in this field how much these two are related and really how to help young people navigate social media in a healthy way.
Anything that gets us talking about these issues will hopefully make a difference. All right, let's talk about the battle at bedtime. We've got a survey from C.S. Mott Children's Hospital in Michigan. Found 1 in 4 parents say their child can't go to sleep because they're worried or anxious. On top of that, nearly 1 in 5 parents from the same poll say they often or sometimes give their kids melatonin to help with sleep. So first, what are some possible solutions to bedtime anxiety? And what are the best practices when it comes to melatonin, especially with kids?
So we need to establish bedtime routines. Routine is the important name of the game for at least addressing some of these concerns. So what does a consistent bedtime routine do? Well, it helps children develop. We know that lack of sleep, not getting enough sleep, can affect children's physical development. It can affect their ability to regulate emotions. It can affect their behavior. And so why is this happening? What's going on at bedtime? And we think that a part of this might be related to anxiety. Are the children afraid of the dark? Are they having bad dreams? And so the 3 things we really want parents to understand is, number 1, you need to have these boundaries. There has to be a balance between helping your child develop good sleep habits and your own sleep. Because if you're not sleeping, you're not as useful during your day. You're not as useful to the children, and so those boundaries are important. The routine also gives you some one-on-one time. It gives you a chance to talk with your children and to figure out what are their anxieties, what are their concerns, and to really address those directly. But number 3, to your question about melatonin, what we want you to do is to really speak with a healthcare provider. We want you to be able to understand what the dosing is and what those recommendations are moving forward for its use.
Speaking of anxiety, we can't finish this segment without talking about Inside Out 2, biggest movie of the year so far. It's resonating with so many people, I think because the character anxiety is hitting home for really folks of all ages. Why do you think seeing this character on the big screen is resonating with so many? And what are some ways we can use a film like this to develop a healthier relationship with all of our emotions?
So, Joe, we're going from one age group keeping us up to another age group keeping us up for different reasons. And I think that's the point, right? Inside Out talks about embarrassment, envy, anxiety. And what we want people to understand, especially, again, in this teenage population, but moving forward into adulthood, is that anxiety can be helpful. But if that emotion is getting out of hand, we want you to be able to, number one, name it. We want you to understand what's happening. We want you to be able to master the coping skills effective with it. So this movie is great because it really allows us to understand that this is a part of natural development. And if you can master some of the things that cause anxiety early on, then you'll be you'll be ready to master those going into adulthood.
I certainly wish I had learned more about that when I was younger. All right, Dr. Erica Richards, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Boston is queuing up the duck boats once again after the Celtics clinched their record 18th NBA title. The boys in green went on one of the most dominant runs in a championship series in years, handily beating the Dallas Mavericks in Game 5 of the finals last night, 106-88. Jaylen Brown got the MVP trophy, which is named after late Celtics great Bill Russell. Their title now breaks a tie with the LA Lakers for the most in league history. It's their first since 2008. The Celtics ended the regular season with the best record in the league, losing only 3 games over the course of the playoffs. Truly dominant. Coming up, it is a long-time loophole used by some of the richest Americans, but soon the strategy that saved them millions, even billions in taxes won't work. One of our favorite financial experts, Caleb Silver, is here to break down the new plan to close that loophole and what it could mean for you. Plus, it is the driving force behind electric cars. We're going to take you to China, where a small province is leading the way toward the future of our roads. This is Morning News Now. Welcome back. This morning, the IRS and Treasury Department are taking aim at a major tax loophole that's used by the nation's wealthiest earners. The agencies announced a plan yesterday to close the loophole used by some filers to avoid paying taxes. Officials say the move could generate more than $50 billion in additional tax revenue over the next decade. For more, we're joined by friend of the show, Investopedia Editor-in-Chief Caleb Silver. Caleb, good morning. So let's start with the loophole. What exactly is it? How is it that some feel it's been exploited?
Yeah, it's called basis shifting, but in accounting parlance, related party basis shifting. This is really the practice of transferring assets to affiliated legal entities to secure tax deductions, taking a depreciation on that and paying less taxes. So companies transferring assets maybe to executives or to investors who set up pass-through entities, limited liability companies, and they get them at a cheaper price and pay less taxes on it. Treasury Department says wealthy taxpayers have been avoiding paying taxes on this for a long time, about $90 billion over the last 10 years. They're trying to close that up in addition to other loopholes that they say the wealthy exploit.
So what happens next? What does it take to actually close a tax loophole?
Yeah, this is a proposal by the IRS and the Treasury Department. It gets voted on by the commissioners. The commissioners will probably vote on it. This crackdown on tax loopholes for the ultra wealthy, this has been a big priority for the Treasury Department and the IRS since Joe Biden got into office. They've been trying to make taxpayers pay their fair share, as the president says.
So, I mean, this loophole has been around for years. Why has it taken so long to try and close it? Why is this happening now?
Well, the accounting industry is pretty powerful, and this is a loophole that exists because of the creation of what we call pass-through entities or limited liability companies. This is a very common practice. You and I probably don't have to deal with it, but if you're an executive of a company and you get a transfer of assets, you usually set that up in a company, not to yourself, because you pay at a lower tax rate. So they're trying to close that loophole. Plus, you get a depreciation of those assets. In other words, you get them at a cheaper price than they're actually worth. That's what the Treasury's trying to close right here. And they say they're going to raise $50 billion over 10 years. That's only $5 billion a year, but it's yet another effort that the Treasury and IRS are trying to make to get more money in to the Treasury Department.
Just $5 billion a year. You say there are other efforts. I mean, are there other loopholes that they're trying to close?
Yeah, and the Treasury Department actually got $80 billion, and the IRS guys should say got $80 billion through the Inflation Reduction Act to do more audits. They need to do more audits in order to find the loopholes to close them. So they're looking at things like deductions for private jets. They're looking at other private back taxes that you might get, millionaires not paying taxes for income they earned over the past few years. These are the types of things they're trying to close. It's not going to affect most people, but the ultra wealthy, the 1%, have very creative ways of avoiding taxes and then getting assets at a lower rate. This is what they're trying to close up now to try to raise more money. It's going to be a battle, though.
And some of us would say it might sound like a good idea, but this is controversial, right?
Yeah, it's controversial because millionaires and billionaires, they use these loopholes in order to transfer money around, and nobody really wants those to end if you're getting that kind of money. So it's a proposal. It'll probably go through. We'll see what happens in the fall, though.
All right, Caleb Silver walking us through it. Thank you so much. More money news now. Amazon's labor union has voted to team up with the Teamsters. CNBC's Silvana Henao has that and other financial headlines. Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning to you. Yes, so union members at Amazon have voted to link up with the Teamsters, a move that could help pressure the company in contract negotiations. The Amazon labor union won a landmark victory in 2022, organizing thousands of workers at a facility in Staten Island, New York. But the union has lost 2 other elections, and attempts to bring Amazon to the bargaining table have stalled. Fisker, the much-hyped electric vehicle startup, has filed for bankruptcy. The move comes just about a year after it released its first EV model. It's the second time a venture by car designer Henrik Fisker has gone bust. Now, Fisker had sought a faster and cheaper entry into the market by outsourcing its manufacturing, but it struggled with the difficulties of running a publicly traded company. And Apple is discontinuing its Buy Now, Pay Later service as it gets set to launch a new program later this year. Users will be able to get installment loans offered through third-party credit, debit cards, and lenders when checking out with Apple Pay. Existing users who have opened loans with the current program called Apple Pay Later will still be able to manage them and make payments via the Wallet app. Apple Pay Later was introduced last year, allowing people to split purchases into 4 payments spread over 6 weeks with no interest or fees, Joe.
All right, Silvana, thank you so much.
Sure thing.
It's no secret that China is one of the top producers of electric cars in the world, and now a lot of that growth is being driven by one of the country's poorest and smallest provinces. CNBC's Eunice Yoon joined us from Beijing with a closer look at this. Eunice, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Well, the Biden administration recently raised tariffs on Chinese EVs out of concern that Beijing's industrial policies were leading to Chinese overcapacity as well as flooded global markets. And as I found out in southwestern China, you could understand the concern.
If you're interested in a Chinese EV, you might want to visit Liuzhou in China's southwest.
This city of 4 million people in the province of Guangxi brands itself as an EV capital, and for good reason.
Liuzhou last year produced almost 500,000 electric vehicles of all types. Some were made at this Wuling new energy factory managed by 30-year auto veteran Yu Hongqiao. Liuzhou is very competitive as a city for new energy vehicle manufacturing, he says. First, the cost of manpower is very low. Second, the logistics cost is low. Third, the industrial foundation is there. Liuzhou is home to 5 major state-backed car makers, including Wuling's parent, Guangxi Auto.
We're on our way to another automaker, Ichi. It's famous for making a car that's used by the government elite, called the Hongqi. About a mile away is another company making EVs, Dongfeng Liuzhou Motor.
And SAIC, whose joint venture with GM and Guangxi Auto produces a popular $4,000 EV.
A lot of the supply chain is here, too. This town has about 300 EV suppliers.
Liuzhou's stated aim has been to produce more than 3 million EVs a year by 2025, but it's fallen short. Data from Japanese auto research firm Marklines shows the city's factories could have the capacity to produce roughly 3 times as many EVs as they currently are. Liuzhou hopes to rev up exports, now at 1% of production. Yu's company set up an overseas department last month, despite international criticism of China's overcapacity. It's groundless, he says. If your cost is low thanks to your scale and your price is more competitive, anyone can compete, right?
What the Chinese see as competitiveness, other countries view as unfair trading practices. In addition to the U.S., Europe, Turkey, as well as other countries have been raising tariffs on Chinese EVs, and now the Chinese government wants to fight back with retaliation.
All right, Eunice, thank you so much. Coming up, a time-honored tradition with a brand new twist. When we come back, we're going to introduce you to an Irish dancer whose modern style is getting the attention of millions online. Don't step away. Morning News Now will be right back. Welcome back. When you think of Irish dance, you might picture folks dancing in perfect formation with those rhythmic clacking shoes and Shirley Temple curls. But one viral creator is putting her own twist on the dance style, and it's catching the attention of millions. NBC News reporter Maya Eaglin joins us now with more on her conversation with this social media sensation. What did she have to say, Maya?
Hey, Joe. So yeah, if you've been scrolling on social, you might have come across Caitlin Sardin's videos. They're electrifying, unique, and genre bending. She says she is hoping to create more acceptance in the world of dance. Take a look. This is not your average Irish jig.
I've been Irish dancing for 20 years, and now I mix Irish dance with hip-hop, folk, dancehall, and whatever I can figure out.
At 26 years old, Caitlin Sardin grew up taking formal ballet and dance lessons, but now she's creating something that's entirely her own. How would you describe your style of dance?
My style of dance is very chaotic, but overall it's fusion. I love mixing all of my cultures together, so I feel like it's a big part of me whenever I dance.
Mixing her love of Irish dance with some genre-bending music, Sardin's caught the attention of millions on social media and some celebrities.
Beyonce's mom, Tina Knowles, she recently reposted me. I've had Azealia Banks, Tinashe, Tyla, and just so many more.
But it wasn't an easy path to success. A lack of diversity in the dance world made it challenging for Caitlin to feel like she fit in.
When I was a child, there wasn't many black dancers besides the ones that I would see at competitions. So the fact that people can see somebody with braids, see somebody that's black doing this and being like, yeah, I could do that too, I feel amazing. A lot of people have been like, oh, that's not Irish dancing. You're not Irish, you'll never be Irish. And I'm just like, I never said I was Irish, and I've also trained in the style for over 20 years. Like, it's absolutely Irish dancing. I just add a twist to it.
Why do you think representation is important in the world of dance?
There's this whole art that a lot of people think they can't do, and I think it's very important to show that no matter your skin color, you're able to do what you want, and you could learn all of these other styles. So I think it's very important for people to have these role models and that they're able to see these things.
One analysis from 2021 that studied dance education found that of the 5,865 people completing a higher education in dance, only 774 were black. What's your hope for people who watch your videos?
I hope that more people try more styles and try what they love. I was holding myself back because I was like, oh, people don't really do this. But you can, there's no limit.
Now, with all the viral success, of course, Caitlin says she's received some negativity on her page, but the support of her family and friends have helped her stay positive, and she's got a busy summer, too. She will be heading to the Nantucket Dance Festival, as well as Dance Magazine's Top 25 to Watch Live. Joe?
Sounds like she'll be busy. So when people do try to make her feel like she shouldn't belong, what are some of the advice she has to kind of get over those challenges?
So she told me she focuses on her truth. She knows her skills, she knows her training, and sometimes it can help tune out some of those negative voices when she just comes back to her center and what she knows to be true.
That is some excellent advice right there. All right, Maya, thank you so much for sharing that story. We appreciate it. That is going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now, but stick with us. The news continues right now. Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is on assignment. Right now on Morning News Now, the heat is on. A split screen of wild summer weather plaguing millions of Americans from coast to coast. Soaring temperatures here on the East Coast caused by a stubborn heat dome, while out west more than 20 wildfires burning across multiple states. Our Michelle Grossman is tracking it all in just a moment. A dire new security warning from one former top intelligence official comparing America's current risk for a terror attack to the run-up to 9/11. We're breaking down just how serious this threat could be. Plus, hoop history. The Boston Celtics besting the Dallas Mavericks in Game 5 of the NBA Finals, clinching a record 18th championship title. We've got all the highlights and the celebrations coming up. And as Pride Month rolls on, my conversation with a leading figure in the world of drag, Evie Oddly, on their new memoir that's truly celebrating being proud out loud. Let's begin this hour with that historic heat wave now taking aim at the East Coast, and it won't be going away anytime soon. It is set to break multiple records over the next week. Millions are already seeing temps in the high 90s, even triple digits. Those life-threatening numbers are expected to linger for days across the Midwest and up the eastern seaboard. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa is in Pittsburgh with the latest.
Hey, Joe, good morning from Pittsburgh, where things are already heating up this morning. Temperatures later on this week could reach triple digits. If that happens, it would be a first here for the month of June. Meantime, the National Weather Service saying this part of the country, the Ohio River Valley, could be in the midst of its most impactful heat wave of the 21st century, as this early blast of brutal summer weather only escalates. This morning, tens of millions from coast to coast are broiling thanks to an early blast of record heat.
Oh my God, it's going to be hot.
More than 70 million Americans waking up under heat alerts from Iowa through Maine. A stubborn heat dome sending temperatures soaring up to 25 degrees above average and threatening to shatter more than 100 daily records this week. In the Midwest, Chicago hitting 97 degrees yesterday, smashing a record set back in 1957. And Detroit residents taking a sweltering 101-degree heat index in stride.
A great smothering heat and then a beautiful cool breeze off the Michigan water.
The National Weather Service warning the Ohio River Valley may experience its most impactful heat wave of the 21st century.
You can't be out too long. You have to stay hydrated.
And those blistering temps are now barreling east, with officials in several major cities warning people to take the heat seriously.
Summers are different than they were before.
New York's governor activating the National Guard, Boston's mayor declaring a state of emergency. But out west, the emergency is wildfires, with more than 20 burning across multiple states. New evacuation orders issued yesterday for an entire community in New Mexico. The village of Ruidoso telling residents go now, with 2 fires growing rapidly in the area. And in California,
make sure you got our back.
The Post fire north of LA now topping 15,000 acres and threatening dozens of homes. With dramatic conditions in the west and extreme heat rolling east, Americans bracing for a wild weather week. All right, back to the heat and adding to the chaos. Tens of thousands of people here in Pittsburgh lost power overnight after severe storms rolled through, and crews are now racing to restore it, knowing how desperate everyone is for air conditioning. Joe?
Needed. Maggie, thank you so much. Let's bring in NBC meteorologist Michelle Grossman with a closer look at the week ahead. Michelle, this is going to stick around for a while, right?
It will. Some spots are going to see this for 7-8 days into the weekend, into early next week. I'll show you that in just a minute, because that is the big weather headline, this heat story. Dangerous, as Maggie mentioned, and we're going to see temperatures well above normal for this time of year, record-breaking temperatures. Also looking at a flood risk throughout portions of the Gulf Coast states, especially Texas into Louisiana. We have a tropical system that could become a tropical storm. We're going to watch that closely over the next day or so. But regardless, we're looking at tropical moisture moving onshore, severe storms in portions of the Central High Plains into parts of the Midwest, and we're looking at that fire risk continuing throughout the West. So a lot going on today, but that big story is the heat dome that is in place. The jet stream so far to the north, what does that do? That allows this hot air to come in. So this big bubble of high pressure just spinning this hot air in, and we're looking at temperatures into the 90s, into the triple digits. If you're not in the triple digits, you factor in the humidity, it's going to feel like that. So we're seeing that exceptionally strong heat dome building into the northeast, again, staying put, not really moving anywhere. It's tacked into place over the next several days. It does move by this weekend. So this weekend, we'll see this high pressure kind of move or retreat back to the south, also to the west. So then we're going to see that bullseye into the Midwest once again, also the mid-Atlantic, relief for upstate New York and also New England as that jet stream dips a little bit further to the south, allowing that cooler Canadian air to come in. But right now, we're looking at 73 million people impacted by heat alerts, we have heat advisories, heat watches, heat warnings. This is a heads up. If you haven't used your air conditioning yet, you want to get that running. If you don't have an air conditioning, you want to have that plan in place, maybe to get to some cool spots or get those fans, because we're looking at major cities, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Boston, under the gun for some really dangerous weather over the next several days. And this is why we're looking at temperatures into the 90s, 92 in Buffalo. But notice those squares next to it, right? That's what it feels like to our bodies. So this is what we're going to register as we're out and about. We'll feel like 100 degrees in Detroit. It's going to feel like 100 degrees in Pittsburgh. Same story in D.C. It will feel like 96 degrees today. Feeling like 90 in Boston. That's the air temperature as well. Same story as we go throughout tomorrow. So no relief. We're going to have some milder overnights as well. So we're not going to get that full relief overnight as well. That's tough on the body. Syracuse 97 tomorrow. It's going to feel like 104. Feeling like 100 degrees in Cleveland. Cleveland feeling like 100 in Concord and feeling like 97 in Hartford. Then as we go throughout Thursday, this story does continue. We are looking at that dangerous heat, record-breaking. We're going to break hundreds of records over the next several days. Albany feeling like 100 degrees on Thursday. Same story in Plattsburgh, feeling like 95. 90s in Buffalo, Binghamton, also Harrisburg, Harrisonburg. Now, as we look at the tropics, they are heating up as well. We have an area of low pressure, not quite a tropical storm. It's called potential tropical cyclone. Even though it has 40-mile-per-hour winds, it doesn't have that tight circulation to call it a tropical storm, but it has high potential. So we're looking at winds around 6 miles, or moving at 6 miles per hour. Those winds are at 40 miles per hour. It's going to make landfall in Mexico. Regardless if it gets a name or not, it doesn't matter. We're looking at a rain shield that's going to bring 10, even 15 inches of rain in some spots along the coast of Texas. We're looking at really rainy conditions also in Louisiana. Because of this, we have tropical alerts from Corpus Christi down to Port Mansfield, also Brownsville. We'll see some really heavy rain as well. Now, we have 8 million under flood alerts because we could see 3 inches per hour. And again, generally 2 to 5 inches of rain, Joe, but we could see 10 inches of rain because we're going to have these heavy, heavy downpours. This is tropical moisture on shore, so that's another story that we're going to watch closely.
All right, we know you will. We want to continue focusing on the extreme heat here. We're going to bring in Dr. Kavita Patel, NBC News medical contributor, to talk about this. So first of all, Dr. Patel, walk us through some of the health risks here. I mean, this truly is serious, especially with it lasting so long, right?
Yeah, it's incredibly serious. So you can see symptoms from just fatigue, just not being able to conduct like your regular business, all the way to incredibly serious life-threatening illness, including death, but conditions that can lead up to death, like rhabdomyolysis, where like the muscle breaks down, the tissues break down. Exposing you to this extreme degree of heat can basically take a toll on every organ in your body, causing your kidneys to shut down. And it doesn't just apply to, by the way, to people who are elderly or with chronic conditions, although they, of course, and the incredibly young are much more vulnerable.
So what are some of the symptoms of heat-related illnesses that we should be aware of? And when you start feeling those symptoms, what should you do?
Yeah, so 100% of the time, if you have even that gut instinct, you know, you walk outside the door, getting into a really warm car, you need to just at least get some air in and getting to a cool place. You already heard Michelle talk about like not just fans and air conditioning, but just trying to get even to a place with shade is something incredibly important that I want to stress up top. And then I'm just going to walk through some of the symptoms that we don't think about. Of course, everybody thinks about kind of sweating. That's incredibly common, like your flushed skin. But I want to stress some things that people don't think about. So some people might not feel that intense sweat, and they might have really concentrated urine. So if you notice that your urine's changing color because you've been working in and outdoors and that you just haven't had that sense of being flushed, but your urine is darker, that can be a sign of heat stress, heat exhaustion. Cramps, especially in the legs. Some people might think, oh, I just had like, you know, I woke up funny, or my legs were just twisted a little funny while I was working. Those cramps can actually be symptoms of heat cramps, as we call them, and heat exhaustion. And then I would just look for other common things: fevers, diarrhea, vomiting. A lot of the symptoms that you and I have talked about over the years with relation to other viral illnesses, you can see that with heat exhaustion and heat kind of anxiety. And then I just want to stress the mental health toll, because some people don't realize that heat can actually cause and precipitate feelings of panic, feelings of stress, and feelings of anxiety. So in short, anything that seems like it's a change from your normal pattern can be a symptom, but some of the lesser common ones, those cramps, the concentrated urine, nausea, vomiting, those are things to look out for.
That is a great point there. Of course, the goal is we want to avoid these symptoms. So how can we prepare?
Right.
How can we actually practice heat safety?
Right. Hydration, hydration, hydration. So getting to a cooler place and planning. I think that everywhere around the country, we've seen cooling centers. We've seen places that are trying to make alternatives. I want to stress something. I've got kids in camp, Joe. I've actually had conversations with the camp counselors and said, you know, if a temperature goes above a certain amount, and so in our case, about 94 degrees, if a temperature goes above a certain amount, kids should not be outside. So you should have a planning kind of mechanism, work, anything that you're doing with your family, and then for yourself. And then make sure not only do you have water at hand, but people have asked me about children, make sure that they've got salty snacks or things that can rehydrate them quickly as well.
Great advice. Dr. Kavita Patel, glad to have you with us this morning. Thank you as always. New this morning, the Biden administration is taking executive action to protect undocumented spouses of American citizens. It's a move that would shield about 500,000 immigrants from deportation. The White House says it's a, quote, new action to keep families together. NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins us now with the details. Gabe, good morning. So what more are we learning about this new executive action? What are some of the highlights?
Hey there, Joe. Good morning. This is a major step for the White House after a crackdown on illegal border crossings by tightening asylum rules earlier this month. As you mentioned, this latest move could impact 500,000 undocumented immigrants living in this country right now. Typically, the U.S. provides a straightforward path to immigrants who enter the country lawfully and end up marrying an American. But this will address those who came here illegally and want to get a green card through marriage. Those who were married before today would be allowed to get work permits on a case-by-case basis without ever having to leave the country. They have to have lived in the U.S. for at least 10 years, and they'll have 3 years to apply for that green card to live and work permanently here. A senior administration official says anyone who has previously been deported will not be eligible, Joe.
All right, so Gabe, we also understand there's a new executive action for DACA recipients who were brought to the U.S. as children. We're now marking 12 years since DACA took effect. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. As you said, back in 2012, it was President Obama who allowed kids whose parents brought them to the U.S. when they were young to stay in this country. They became known as Dreamers. Now, the Biden administration will make it easier for them to get work visas if they've earned a college degree and received a job offer from a U.S. employer. We expect legal challenges to all of this, especially in an election year. Recent NBC News polling shows that voters consider immigration one of the most important issues facing the country, second only to inflation and the cost of living. The Trump campaign, meanwhile, is already jumping on this news, accusing President Biden of, quote, prioritizing illegal immigrants over Americans, Joe.
And Gabe, we know earlier this month, President Biden signed another executive action aimed at tightening asylum restrictions at the southern border. Where do things stand now as far as the number of migrants who are actually attempting to cross the border?
Well, Joe, Customs and Border Protection reports that the number of daily encounters at the southern border between ports of entry has dropped significantly since the announcement of that executive action. It's now down to less than 3,000 per day, and that is among the lowest totals since the start of the Biden administration. But for critics, it is still too high. Joe.
All right. Gabe Gutierrez at the White House. Gabe, thank you so much. There is an alarming warning today about the possibility of a terrorist attack against Americans. In a Foreign Affairs article, the former acting CIA director describes the threat level to the U.S. That article headlined, quote, "The terrorism warning lights are blinking red again. Echoes of the run-up to 9/11. NBC News senior Washington correspondent, News Now anchor Hallie Jackson breaks down what is causing all this concern.
Hey there, good morning. Taken together, this has been a cascade of warnings from top officials about the threat level in this country in recent weeks, with the former acting CIA chief saying, given the stakes, complacency is a greater risk than alarmism. New alarm bells about the threat of terrorism in America from a former top intelligence official. Warning in Foreign Affairs, the United States faces a serious threat of a terrorist attack in the months ahead. Former acting CIA Director Michael Morell with national security expert Graham Allison comparing the current threat level to the run-up to 9/11 and pointing to testimony from FBI Director Christopher Wray on the impact of the Hamas attack on Israel.
We've seen the threat from foreign terrorists rise to a whole nother level after October 7th.
And from other top Biden administration officials.
And we are in an elevated global threat environment.
Every morning, we worry about this question. We try to track anyone who might be trying to hurt the country.
Last week, U.S. immigration officials arrested 8 men from Tajikistan for potential ties to ISIS in Central Asia. Two people familiar with the matter tell NBC News the men entered the U.S. through the southern border, some as recently as last year, and that their criminal background checks came back clean when they crossed. House Republicans for months have blamed President Biden's immigration positions.
That as a result of the administration's policies allowing people to cross the border unvetted, we have terrorists that are actively working with inside the United States that are a threat.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials recorded more than 200 encounters with officials on the terror watch list at the southern border in fiscal year 2023, and nearly twice as many on the northern border. Altogether, just a fraction, less than 0.5% of all CBP encounters that year. The White House says Congress must do more, pointing to the sweeping border security bill killed by Republicans earlier this year.
Everybody can talk a good game, but you can't really change what's happening at the border unless you have legislation. There's no magic wand that can be waved here to make it all go away.
The biggest threat we face are attacks overseas against our embassies, against our military bases. I think there is a threat against the homeland, but it's going to be much harder to penetrate our defenses.
There's no current advisory in place now, and top national security spokesperson John Kirby says he's not aware of a decision to change that, but that it's something they're watching very closely every day. The concern remains not just groups like ISIS-K, which is that ISIS offshoot blamed for attacks this year in Iran and Moscow, but domestic violent extremists as well. Back to you.
All right, Hallie, thank you. On Capitol Hill today, the CEO of Boeing is expected to be grilled by Congress over ongoing airplane safety issues. It comes as the company faces FAA and FBI investigations over that MAX 9 door plug blowout in January, along with new allegations about quality control on Boeing factory floors. NBC News senior correspondent Tom Costello has the latest from Washington.
Yeah, the Senate committee says new whistleblowers have come forward alleging that aircraft parts which did not meet Boeing standards were still used on new Boeing planes and were hidden from FAA inspectors. This morning, Boeing says it encourages whistleblowers to come forward, and CEO Dave Calhoun will tell Congress Boeing's culture is far from perfect, but it is making progress. Also in the hearing room today, families of the victims who died in two fatal MAX 8 crashes overseas. Zipporah Curria has again flown all the way from London to Washington on behalf of her father. Joseph Curria died when Ethiopia Airlines Flight 302, a Boeing MAX 8, crashed in 2019. It followed the crash of Lion Air Flight 610, also a MAX 8, which crashed in 2018. In all, 346 people died. Zipporah will be in the hearing room today pushing Congress and the Justice Department to hold Boeing accountable.
I never want any 23-year-old to wake up to the reality that I've woken up to and the nightmare that I've continuously lived for the last 5 years.
In the crosshairs today, Boeing CEO David Calhoun, who was chairman of the board during the MAX 8 crashes. He's already admitted to serious quality control and safety breakdowns at Boeing, and last month submitted to the FAA a plan to address Boeing's problems. The company remains under FAA and FBI investigation. In written testimony, Calhoun apologizes to the families of those lost and the passengers on the MAX 9 plane that suffered the mid-air blowout in January. He'll tell Congress, we are taking comprehensive action today to strengthen safety and quality. In hearings last week, bipartisan frustration with Boeing and the FAA.
These safety lapses have caused serious questions in the flying public about the safety of Boeing's planes.
There is a disconnect between senior leadership and frontline employees on building a safety culture.
FAA Chief Michael Whitaker. Can Boeing change the culture from the C-suite down to the person on the assembly line? That's a big ask.
It is a big ask, but culture change is possible. It takes a long-term commitment. It takes top-down leadership, but it is possible, so we're going to make sure they're executing.
FAA Chief Whitaker has only been on the job since last fall, but he admits the FAA failed to properly inspect Boeing facilities and hold it accountable after the MAX 8 crashes. He also tells me more Boeing whistleblowers have come forward with more allegations. Back to you.
All right, Tom, thank you. Much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now, including the shark attack survivor who's now speaking out about a terrifying encounter off the California coast earlier this month. But first, the West has its eyes on North Korea as Russia's Vladimir Putin touches down there for the first time in more than 2 decades. What he's expected to discuss with Kim Jong-un. That's next. Welcome back. Russian President Vladimir Putin heading to North Korea today for talks with leader Kim Jong-un. It's Putin's first visit there in 24 years. Both leaders did meet last September in Russia. In a letter published in North Korean state media ahead of the trip, the Russian president praised the country for supporting Moscow's war in Ukraine. NBC News international correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer joined us now from Beijing. She's keeping a close eye on this. Janice, second face-to-face meeting between the leaders in about 9 months. Do we know what's on the agenda and what both sides hope to get out of this?
Well, Vladimir Putin met with Kim Jong-un last September when Kim traveled to eastern Russia by train. Now Putin making this landmark visit. The streets of Pyongyang have apparently been decorated for the state visit. That will include ceremonies, a tea party, and a concert. The main goal for Putin is to shore up military ties and a supply line, namely artillery shells and rockets, with the war in Ukraine dragging on and Russia facing shortages in its weapons supplies. According to the U.S. and to South Korea, North Korea has provided Russia with munitions, and Moscow has in turn given aid and other technologies. Both countries will deny this. But as you mentioned, Joe, ahead of this visit, Putin thanked North Korea for its support for Russia's war in Ukraine, and also said they will beat sanctions together.
No doubt America and the West are keeping a close eye on this. How are U.S. officials viewing this meeting?
The White House has called this visit concerning, the relationship getting deeper, and that is cause for concern because of how it's not only feeding the war in Ukraine, but also instability on the Korean Peninsula. Here's what John Kirby at the NSC had to say.
We're not concerned about the trip. What we are concerned about, Trevor, is the deepening relationship between these two countries. Not just because of the impacts it's going to have on the Ukrainian people, because we know North Korean ballistic missiles are still being used to hit Ukrainian targets, but because there could be some reciprocity here that could affect security on the Korean Peninsula. Now, we haven't seen the parameters of all that right now, certainly haven't seen it come to fruition, but we're certainly going to be watching that very, very closely.
After this visit to North Korea, Putin will then go on and visit Vietnam, which is another trip that the U.S. is going to be watching very closely, Joe.
No doubt. Speaking of instability on the Korean Peninsula, Janice, there have been reports of warning shots fired by South Korean soldiers at the DMZ between North and South Korea. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, we know the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, is what divides North and South Korea. And according to South Korea's military, it happened when a group of North Korean soldiers, about 20 to 30 of them, briefly crossed the military demarcation line. Now, officials say it did not seem intentional, but this is the second time in just over a week that it's happened. North Korea has been sending soldiers to this border area to do construction work and to plant landmines, both seen as measures to prevent defectors from crossing into the south. Adding to tension, reports that multiple North Korean soldiers were killed by landmine explosions on the north side of the DMZ. Again, this according to South Korea's military. They didn't say exactly when this happened, but did point out that this was a separate incident. Joe?
All right, Janice, a lot to keep an eye on. Thank you so much. More headlines from around the world now. At least 11 people are dead, dozens more missing after a pair of shipwrecks off the coast of Italy. NBC international correspondent Claudio Lavanga is in Rome with that and other world headlines. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Well, that's right. According to United Nations agencies, at least 64 migrants were missing in the Mediterranean Sea, and several others, as you mentioned, were rescued after their ship wrecked off the coast of southern Italy. Now, according to survivors, the boat has set off from Turkey 8 days earlier, and when it was about 125 miles from the coast of southern Italy, it caught fire and overturned. The survivors also say those missing at sea came from Iran, Syria and Iraq. In a separate shipwreck off the southern Italian island of Lampedusa, rescue workers from the German aid group Rescue Ship say they saved dozens of people but found 10 bodies trapped below the deck. Let's now go to El Salvador, where at least 11 people have died due to torrential rains. Civil protection authorities there say the victims, including children, died as a result of landslides or accidents caused by trees falling onto roads. Nearly 900 people were forced to evacuate to temporary shelters as the country has been battered by downpours since the weekend. Torrential rain also affected other countries across the Pacific coast, including Mexico, Honduras, and Panama. Let's end this tour of the world in Paris, where authorities rehearsed the Summer Olympics opening ceremony on the River Seine, involving a parade of 55 boats. The primary objective was to make sure the boats follow the ceremony scheduled precisely, and will be followed by another rehearsal with a larger fleet next week. The opening ceremony on July the 26th on the river is expected to be spectacular, but it presents logistical and security challenges. The plan is also to use the river for Olympic triathlon and marathon swimming, but test results so far show the E. coli in the water is still in the excess of safe swimming thresholds. Back to you, John.
All right, I hope they have a backup plan. Claudio, thank you so much. Coming up as we get ready to celebrate Juneteenth tomorrow, we're taking a closer look at the widening wealth gap between black and white workers here in the U.S., why it exists, and some of the biggest contributing factors and possible solutions. Stay with us. This is Morning News Now. Welcome back. As our country prepares to celebrate Juneteenth tomorrow, we wanted to take a closer look at the widening racial wealth gap between black and white Americans in the U.S. National data shows the latest gap between white and black families is more than $214,000. This disparity means that for every dollar a white family makes, a black family earns 15 cents. That is the focal point of a new book called 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. This morning, we are joined by the authors of that book, Ebony Reed and Louise Story. Thank you for being here. Congratulations on the book, an important topic that I don't think people know enough about. Ebony, first of all, just tell us how the idea come about to even write this.
Sure. Louise and I were working together as colleagues at the Wall Street Journal in the summer of 2020. Like many people in our country, we started having conversations about inequities, things we'd seen in the workplace, in our country, and we realized there's no book that has been written about the history of the black-white wealth gap to present. And so we're really proud to have produced this book.
Louise, help us understand, and you could probably talk for a very long time about this, but how did we develop this gap? I mean, this is generations and generations, right?
Well, 15 cents on the dollar is what the amount of money that the typical black family has compared to $1 in wealth held by the typical white family. So we are on a mission to make 15 cents on the dollar a nationally recognized statistic. And you're right, there's lots of causes of it, but it dates all the way back to slavery. But our book also covers redlining, access to education, banking, the ways people have been promoted in different industries and included or not included. It's really like peeling back an onion, and reading our book will also help you think about your own journey, whatever race you are, and how your family's wealth trajectory changed over time.
An interesting thing about your book, you're following 4 young black professionals, millennials, and then you're also profiling a banking company, Ebony, that's trying to close this wealth gap. Tell us about this.
We cover Greenwood Bank that was launched back in 2020. And our book also has the first historical account of Ambassador Andrew Young's family history, and also that of rapper Killer Mike.
Got it. And what did you learn about all this?
I mean, it's very interesting to go back in time. I mean, we learned some things about, I don't want to spoil it for people who need to read the book.
Read the book. Give a little tease here. Louise, I mean, what can we do, first of all, to stop the gap from growing, but then also to try and close it? What are some things we all need to be conscious of to move things in the right direction?
So we do not take any policy positions in the book. We're journalists, and so this is not something that comes down on one side of the political aisle on any issue. However, we do make some personal recommendations that people can do in their own lives. One of those recommendations is to partner with someone of a different background, perhaps someone across racial lines. We have done that We have learned a lot in this book, not only through our interviews and our research, but by working out an equitable relationship between the two of us, factoring in money, time, and thinking very widely about what is fair. And if more people had this sort of partnership, it would help them understand the give and take that we need across communities.
Ebony, what's the most important lesson you hope people can take from your book?
The statistic. We are trying to make this a nationally recognized statistic. A typical black family has 15 cents in wealth for every $1 a typical white family has.
And
wealth is different from income.
Are people surprised when they hear this number? They must be, right? I mean, I know it doesn't, we know we've been dealing with these issues for centuries, but yet it still feels like that number is just stunning to me.
That number is where the black-white wealth gap was in the 1950s. It's gone up, moved around, but today, 15 cents in the dollar is at the same level that it was for wealth in the 1950s. And people are surprised. Look at all that's happened in society since the 1950s. But many of the things that have happened in the last 50, 60 years weren't necessarily aimed at wealth. Remember, wealth is assets minus liabilities, what you own minus what you owe. And a lot of the things that have happened in the last 50 years have involved helping people get more assets, but not thinking about how they would be paid for. So, for example, helping people go to college, but not thinking about how would you pay for it. And black American families have more student debt than white American families. So you really have to think about the whole equation of wealth if you want to look at this statistic and how you would change 15 cents on the dollar.
All right, Louise Story and Ebony Reed, thank you so much. Congratulations on your book. You can check out their book, 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. It is now out now wherever books are sold. Staying with tomorrow's Juneteenth celebrations, Major League Baseball is embracing the occasion with a special regular season game. Today, co-host Craig Melvin traveled to Birmingham, Alabama for a first look at an event honoring the history of the Negro Leagues.
Rickwood Field's green walls contain more than a century of baseball memories. The oldest park in the nation, built in 1910.
This is hallowed ground. I mean, Willie Mays, Satchel Paige. I mean, it's
Hank Aaron, Jackie Robinson, all the greats.
All the greats played here. And now it adds a special new chapter. Major League Baseball is preparing for a tribute to the Negro Leagues, a special game honoring players who were excluded from the game they excelled at because of the color of their skin. There were multiple major Negro Leagues established back in 1920, and some lasted for more than 40 years. April Brown is MLB's Senior Vice President of Social Responsibility.
We really hope that young people across the globe learn about these great players, the Negro Leagues players who didn't make a lot of money, but loved the game. They changed the game in many ways. And the game that we see on the field today is a product of that.
One of those men, 99-year-old Bill Greason.
Every Sunday, this ballpark would be filled. This was one of the greatest ballparks we played in.
Even if he'd never picked up a baseball, Greason would be an American icon. He's been a preacher in Birmingham for 5 decades, grew up neighbors with the future Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and became one of the first black men to serve in the Marines. Greason first took the mound at age 22 and played 5 seasons in the Negro Leagues. What was your go-to pitch?
Looked like a fastball.
Yeah.
And drop off the table. It was awful. If I had 2 strikes on you, that's bye.
During his time with the Birmingham Black Barons, who called Rickwood Field home, he was teammate, mentor, and friend to Willie Mays, one of the greatest players of all time.
What was your relationship with him like?
We were like brothers, and whatever I could do to help him stay strong in the faith and believe he could be one of the best there was.
Greason himself finally made it to the majors in 1954, becoming the first black pitcher in St. Louis Cardinals history.
This was 7 years after Jackie Robinson had already integrated the league. You still faced a fair amount of racism.
Oh, I was not fully accepted, even in the clubhouse. I was apart from the other fellas.
But Thursday night will be a celebration, and there is no better city for it than Birmingham, Alabama, home to those famous black barons, yes, but also an epicenter of the civil rights movement. Once considered the most segregated city in the country, where its black citizens faced fire hoses in the streets and bombs at their churches. A city of both black tragedy and triumph.
So we hope that young people learn about this history, Birmingham being the center of civil rights, and that people learn that there were Negro Leagues players who had dreams to just play this game that they loved, and were able to do it right here.
A fitting homecoming for Reverend Greason and the thousands of fellow players like him.
God gave me gifts. I used it, and it was a blessing.
Our thanks to Craig Melvin for that report. All right, coming up, a swimmer speaking out this morning after a very close call in the water. After the break, our own Gotti Schwartz's conversation with the shark attack survivor and the new warnings for beachgoers just as summer starts to heat up. Stay with us. Welcome back. Shark attacks are back in the headlines as we head into summer. 3 people were injured in Florida this month, and a San Diego swimmer was attacked just 2 weeks ago. He shared his incredible story with NBC News Now anchor Gotti Schwartz. Take a look.
Beachgoers are soaking up the sun and surf as summer gets underway. But beware, new warnings about the dangers of sharks under the water's surface. Caleb Adams bears the scars from his close encounter.
I yelled help and shark, just 2 clear words.
Caleb was in the waters of Del Mar, California, with 18 members of an open water swim group.
It was a strong hit to my body. I knew I had been hit by a shark, and I tussled with the animal for what was seconds.
Swim buddy Kevin Barrett heard him yelling for help.
You know that that's a real scream.
On the second time I struck the animal and I felt a softer tissue, I'm going to speculate that that was inside the shark's mouth. And I had several cuts on my hand and wrist.
The shark disappeared by the time Kevin got there.
When I was swimming him in, the blood was just pouring out of his chest. We really just needed to get him in shore as quickly as possible.
Lifeguard Cameron Whiting helped get Caleb onto the beach.
We could really see the traumatic extent of his injuries, and it was not pretty. Cameron kept his hand under Caleb's chin. He just said, just don't look down. Caleb was amazingly calm.
Caleb was rushed into surgery, his entire torso a roadmap of shark bites and stitches. Experts say attacks like the one Caleb survived may become more frequent as waters get crowded this summer.
It is very much a wild environment anytime you're entering the ocean.
Though still extremely rare, last year saw an uptick in unprovoked shark attacks and fatalities. The U.S. had 36 unprovoked attacks in 2023, accounting for more than half of the 69 incidents across the globe. Florida leading the nation in attacks. Just this month, 3 swimmers off the Florida Panhandle were attacked by sharks in a single day. But West Coast beaches are also a hotspot. No stranger to overcoming health challenges, Caleb had survived a stroke just 8 months prior. And now, barely 2 weeks after the shark attack, he's returned to the same beach with his wife, Jenny.
It's emotional being here, without question. My biggest takeaway when I think about these last 2 experiences and more recently the shark encounter is that I have a beautiful community to lean on, and I'm very thankful.
Our thanks to Gotti Schwartz for that report. Shark experts say this stretch of San Diego has become a nursery for juvenile white sharks. They're running a series of tests to figure out the type and size of the shark that bit Caleb and how many more might be in the area. Well, this morning, the Boston Celtics are waking up as NBA champs once again. The team returned to their dominant form last night in Game 5 of the NBA Finals, beating the Dallas Mavericks at home 106-88. After finishing the regular season with the best record in the league, the Celtics, they lost only 3 games en route to their record-breaking 18th NBA championship. Joining us now from Boston with all the details of a special night at the TD Garden is NBC News correspondent George Solis. George, I've got to imagine the energy pretty good there in Boston this morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. Absolutely electric. The city came alive. It was almost meant to be, almost scripted for that Game 5 to be back here in Boston. The streets flooded with fans people just so excited to celebrate after that 16-year drought. Banner 18 secured. The city, of course, slow to wake up after all night partying. We saw it in the streets. We saw people climbing light poles. We saw people climbing trees. Of course, the police here and the security very tight. Very early when it became obvious that this team was going to win, the police clearly making sure that the crowd stay calm, stay controlled. And so fortunately, we can report that things went off without a hitch, Joe. But let me tell you, what an environment to be in. It was absolutely phenomenal to see the Celtics win here at home. And of course, people, of course, very excited for that parade that'll be happening in a few short days.
I can't think of anything that would make me so excited I'd want to climb a light pole. Anyway, Jaylen Brown, he was the MVP for the NBA Finals. You know, that's an honor that's named after Celtics legend Bill Russell. Remind us what he did during the playoffs and the finals to earn that honor. What was his message last night?
You know, he was very humbled, obviously, having this award named after Celtics legend Bill Russell. Our MVP here, of course, also an activist. So it was very special for him to sort of commemorate that moment and to really celebrate this moment with his teams. I mean, he was very humble about it, saying any one of his teammates could have taken this MVP award. But of course, the numbers show it. I mean, he was absolutely electric last night, Joe. And again, just part of this roster that dominated the Mavericks during Game 5. And again, after that Game 4 loss, obviously things were a little bit shaky. So to see them rally in such a way here and to see how it all came together, again, just really, really special for this team and for the city of Boston, Joe.
For those who don't know much about the Celtics, you do need to talk about the head coach. He's only 35 years old, only had experience as a Division II college coach before this. Tell us about him and what he had to say.
Joe Mazzulla is a very interesting character. I mean, very focused on the analytics. He's also received a lot of criticism in his short tenure as the coach, but obviously yesterday was all about the win. I do want to take a moment to quote something he said that I found very interesting, and it's a message that he has conveyed this season and wants to carry on throughout this championship series and potentially any others that come. He says, I think just having an understanding that praise and criticism are both just as dangerous if you don't handle them well. And I think we talked about that as a team this year. Winning is just as dangerous as losing if you don't handle it well. And then he also very, characterized that there are very few chances to be great, and you get very few changes in life to carry the ownership and responsibilities of what these banners and all these great people and great players that come here. He also wanted to give credit to Celtics players of past, not just the present, to really commemorate how special this win in, again, after a 16-year drought. So again, a lot of ceremony, a lot of circumstance, and a lot of history here, Joe.
So in Boston, they don't just celebrate with a parade, but with a duck boat parade. When can we expect to see that? Yeah, so everything is scheduled for Friday tentatively. A lot of people are hoping that obviously you want to do it as quickly as possible, but the heat is also a concern here today. Weather looking to be a little bit more favorable on Friday. We're actually expecting a news conference with Boston Mayor Michelle Wu a little bit later today to give us some of the more nuanced details of this celebration, including the duck boats. Of course, everyone waiting for it. That'll happen right here behind me. So again, we're looking for a pretty big parade this Friday. And if yesterday's celebration was any indication of what this crowd may look like, we are expecting a massive turnout for this celebration, Joe. I think that is a safe prediction right there. George Solis, thank you so much. Coming up, we are continuing to celebrate all things Pride this month on Morning News. Now, after the break, a candid conversation with a leading figure of drag, Evie Oddly, and Michael Bach, the co-author of their new memoir on queer acceptance and embodying the very definition of being proud out loud. That is next. Stay with us. Our celebration of Pride Month continues with our series Proud Out Loud, focusing on trailblazers in the LGBTQ+ community. And this morning, we're chatting with one of the most revolutionary queens to ever appear on RuPaul's Drag Race. We're talking, of course, about Evie Oddly, winner of season 11 of the Emmy-winning show. Evie is out with Evie's first book, a memoir called All About Evie, Into the Oddity. The book is co-authored by Michael Bach, an expert on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we are lucky to be joined by both Evie and Michael this this morning. Thank you both for being here. Congratulations on the book. I have to ask you, you even say in the book, usually people write their memoirs at the end of their careers. For you, this is just the beginning. Why did you want to write this book now?
I feel like the best thing any of us can do is have regular check-ins with ourselves and make sure that we're doing everything possible to, like, please the child within you and please the child within you right now and make sure your dreams are still alive and well. And I just realized after all the reality television I'd done that I didn't really have a grasp on how I saw my own story. And so when Michael came to me saying, hey, you're interesting, I want to know more, I had to spill.
So it is fair to say, Michael, you are a RuPaul Drag Race super fan. That would be putting it mildly, right?
Yeah, I would be putting it mildly, yes.
You've seen pretty much every episode?
Every episode, every season, every franchise around the world.
Why is it you approached Evie and said, I want to do a book with you?
You know, I saw Evie come onto the show, and you see the edit, you see what the producers share with you, which is not all of what you actually see about a person. And I thought, this is a person I want to know better. I want to know what's behind some of those moments on season 11 of RuPaul's Drag Race. And I wanted to really get a better sense of who they are.
Did you get what you thought you were going to get out of this going in?
Yeah, actually, I did. It's strange because I really was just looking for some closure on a chapter of my life. I was looking for a way to see that my story is bigger than any one specific instance or shortcoming or hardship. And, you know, it's a process, and I'm going to have to remind myself every day. But I feel like we found it multiple times and time over, and I'm excited to share the last bit of old me with everybody.
I think your book makes it clear the whole process is an evolution. What is it you hope people can learn about sexual orientation and gender identity, but really what do you hope society right now can take away?
I think society right now can take away to care a little bit less about what other people are expressing or doing or feeling. The point of being human is that you should be chasing your own happiness, and that looks so different for everybody. And, you know, I don't understand why anybody would spend time focusing on what's making somebody else happy when you could be focusing on trying to achieve your own.
Michael, I want to ask you about that because you're an expert on DEI. In this moment, in the last couple of years, we've seen legislation that is directed specifically at the drag community. So why do you think we are in this moment? Why is it people are not caring less, they're caring more?
It's a good question, Joe. I think a lot of it is dog whistle politics, and some of our elected officials who are trying to fan the flames with their base in order to get elected. I'm not saying that I am a Democrat or a Republican. I'm politically agnostic. But I will say that there are members on both sides of the political spectrum that are driving that behavior. And it's having an effect. There was a study that came out this year that found that 76% of Americans were supportive of LGBTQ+ rights. However, that's down 4% from the previous year. So that behavior is having an impact on how society perceives our community. And the result is last year, 513 pieces of legislation were either tabled or passed that were anti-LGBTQ, and most of them are anti-trans. And we just need to change that behavior.
We only have a minute left here, but we remove the politics from it. I want to ask you each, how do we make that change?
Well, we need our allies to stand up and have their voice heard. Call your legislators. Make it clear that this legislation is not acceptable. But you have to participate. We need our allies to be active.
Evie, what do you think? How do we make that change?
As the person dressed up like this, I say you need to continue to express yourself and continue to show people in your life that they know somebody who is other, and that it's not so scary after all.
We have 30 seconds left. You talk about the next chapter for you. What does that look like?
You know, it just looks like continuing to make art, continuing to try and give a little bit of the experience that was given to me back and forward to other people who need it, make people happy, do a little dance.
You know you've inspired so many people with just being your authentic self, and we appreciate you taking the time, sharing your story. Michael, thank you for coming and sharing your expertise as well. The book is called All About Evie, Into the Oddity. It hits bookshelves tomorrow. Make sure to check it out. That is going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now, but stick with us. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.